The visual is not important here. The music is not important here. The voice is not important here. What matters are the words. If you cannot listen to the words, you do not belong here. If you understand this, welcome to the Fate Club. Higher soul affinity does not begin as an event, but as a slow shift in how reality is processed without the need for explanation. It is not the discovery of something new, but a return to a layer of perception that had long been covered by the noise of identity, memory, and linear interpretations of life. In this state, human existence stops being perceived as a single segment between birth and disappearance and begins to appear as a continuous movement of consciousness across forms that change, yet carry a shared trace. Relationships between people no longer seem to begin and end the way they once did, but reveal themselves as interrupted lines of a much longer trajectory. Some encounters arrive without explanation, without reason, and without a story, yet they carry a strange sense of inevitability, as if nothing new has occurred and only a continuation has resumed. Higher affinity in such moments does not manifest as emotion or desire, but as silent recognition that requires no confirmation. A person begins to notice that with certain individuals, reality behaves differently. It slows down, simplifies, and stops resisting. These connections do not arise from similarity of character, opinions, or goals, but from compatibility of inner structures that remember shared movement. Memory here does not function as recollection, but as orientation, activating without images and without emotion. Reincarnational connection is not revealed as something exceptional, but as a natural consequence of consciousness retaining continuity, even as form changes. Relationships that carry this continuity appear in life in many forms, sometimes as closeness, sometimes as tension or distance, while the form itself is not decisive. What matters is that the presence of the other activates a shift in the perception of reality that persists even after their departure. Gradually, the perception of time also changes as it stops behaving like a straight line and begins to appear as a field where layers of existence touch one another. Past lives do not return in this field as stories, but as silent knowledge of direction that influences decisions without conscious effort. Higher soul affinity does not appear as fusion, but as precise attunement, where each form remains distinct while movement is shared. A person begins to realize that some relationships are not meant to fulfill needs, but to stabilize perception. These relationships often arrive without promises, without futures, and without expectations, yet they leave a lasting shift in how reality is processed. Beyond earthly existence, these connections appear even simpler because there are no social frameworks there to name or rank them. Consciousness in those realms moves according to similarity of experiential frequency, not according to identity or form. When this movement translates back into human experience, a feeling of deep familiarity arises without the need for explanation. Higher affinity then begins to appear not as the creation of new bonds, but as the remembering of existing ones. In this process, the very function of consciousness changes. Consciousness stops functioning as a blocked state and begins to function as a space for receiving knowledge from embodied experiences that were previously separated, filtered, or inaccessible, and that gradually reintegrate into direct perception. These experiences do not appear as memories of specific events, but as shifts in attitude, reaction, and the way presence itself is perceived. A person begins to notice that some situations are known before they are understood, and that decisions arise without inner conflict. With this, the need for control weakens because direction is perceived as self-evident. Higher soul affinity in this context offers neither comfort nor specialness, only a precise explanation for why some encounters alter the trajectory of life without visible cause. Relationships stop being perceived as possessions or obligations and begin to appear as transitional nodes within a wider structure. Separation stops meaning loss and begins to mean a shift of activity into another layer. The continuity of consciousness ceases to be tied to one body, one story, or one role. Higher affinity reveals itself as a silent network through which consciousness moves repeatedly to deepen perception without explanation. Each encounter in this network shifts perception by a subtle degree that cannot be measured but can be recognized through a change in orientation. Life in this state stops appearing as a sequence of coincidences and begins to be perceived as a consistent process of consciousness moving through forms. Relationships within this process are not the goal, but the mechanism of calibration. Higher soul affinity reveals nothing new. It only uncovers what was always present beneath the surface of the individual story. There is no dramatic rupture or climax here, only a quiet shift of emphasis from form to continuity. And it is precisely within this shift that human experience expands without losing its concreteness. In this expanded state, the way meaning is assigned to encounters also changes, because meaning is no longer tied to outcome, but to precision of timing. Some people enter life only briefly, yet their presence leaves a trace that exceeds the duration of contact. Others remain longer, yet their role is not closeness, but the stability their existence creates within the field of perception. Higher affinity in these cases is not measured by intensity, but by how precisely it fits into the overall structure of movement. A person gradually realizes that not all relationships are meant to develop. Some exist only to confirm direction. This confirmation does not occur through words or actions, but through a release of inner tension that happens in the presence of the other. A state emerges in which nothing needs to be explained, because presence alone is sufficient to maintain balance. Within this space, the need to define who is who and what role they serve begins to dissolve. Identity becomes fluid and ceases to function as a fixed point of orientation. Higher soul affinity thus does not support the creation of new roles, but the dissolution of old ones. A person stops seeking validation through external relationships and begins to perceive that connection exists independently of the attention given to it. Relationships are relieved of pressure and cease to be sites of expectation. They become neutral spaces in which consciousness can move freely without defense or projection. Higher soul affinity reveals itself as calm continuity that does not require form in order to be real. It remains present in absence, in silence, and in distance. In this state, the perception of solitude also changes because solitude no longer signifies separation. It becomes a space in which the network of connections can be perceived without interference. A person begins to realize that isolation never truly existed, only attention directed toward the wrong layer of reality. When attention shifts, connections reveal themselves without the need to create them. Higher soul affinity does not lead to accumulation of relationships, but to their simplification. What remains is only what is precise and functional in the given moment of consciousness movement. Everything else falls away naturally, without conflict and without the need for closure. And within this natural reduction, it becomes clear that continuity was never threatened, it was only obscured by excess form. If you understand this, welcome to the club.